Conservatives today love to mock the excesses of woke culture. Blue-haired activists screaming about oppression, corporate HR departments policing pronouns, Hollywood churning out another soulless, CGI-infested morality play, and it's easy to laugh. But let's be honest, what has conservatism built in its place? For the last half-century, conservatives have prided themselves on winning elections, cutting taxes, and deregulating markets, while ceding nearly every artistic, literary, and cultural institution to the radical left. But now, with President Trump's victory, we have a window, an opportunity to build something real, a culture rooted in truth, beauty, and Christian ideals. This episode is brought to you by our premier sponsors, Armored Republic and Reese Fund, as well as our Patreon members and our faithful donors. You can join our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Right Response Ministries, or you can donate by going to rightresponseministries.com/donate. For my entire lifetime, conservatives have been in survival mode. But for the first time, in the providence of God, it seems as though we may have some tailwinds. So how do we turn this momentum into a lasting cultural legacy? Let's get into it with special guest John Doyle from Heck Off Commie. Welcome. Here we are. We've got John Doyle from Heck Off Commie. He's going to be joining us at the top of the second segment, which will begin around 3:30 p.m. Central Time. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We're glad to have you here. Do us a favor and go ahead and subscribe to Right Response on YouTube. Go ahead and follow us on X. Our videos launch there as well. Our handle is @RightResponseM. @RightResponseM if you want to follow us on X. If you can give us a like to this video to help boost the algorithm, and the best thing that you can do, honestly, is sharing the video. If you're willing to share it on your YouTube or share it on your X channel, we would greatly appreciate that. Like I said, we've got John Doyle. He's going to be hopping on at the top of our second segment, which will begin at 3:30 p.m. Central Time. And for those of you who are new to the channel, our schedule each week is Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We live stream on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We start at 3 p.m. Central Time, and if we have a guest, which we do probably about half of the episodes, we have different guests from different ministries or different businesses or different channels that come and join us, and we usually have them join us for the second and sometimes third segment as well. All right, so that being said, let's go ahead and start to lay out the framework for this episode, and then we'll invite John on. Michael, lead us off.
All right, really excited for today. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Good afternoon to those of you watching live. Appreciate you all being with us. Today, we're going to be talking about the moment that we're in, but specifically, is it possibly time when conservatives and Christians could, again, begin to build culture? Now, as I was doing some research for this, I started Googling around conservative culture building, Christian conservative culture building, and I realized, this is actually something that Christians think about a lot. The problem is, almost all the searches that I was finding were how to build a vibrant church culture, how to have a church culture that is different than the world, how to have a church culture that is like the world. And the idea of culture, at least whenever I put the label Christian, sometimes even conservative, in front of it, I was getting how to have a conservative business culture, or how to have your church have a certain type of culture. And it kind of surprised me. And I thought, for all of our talk about culture this, culture that, I actually think, in a lot of ways, we have no idea what we're talking about when we talk about building culture. What is culture? How do we build culture? What is it? And I did some reading of some really great articles, and we'll share some quotes from those later on. But if you listen at all to Jeff Childers from Coffee and COVID, just this week he was pointing out the fact that a lot of things that tend to build and change in culture have been stagnant in America for the last 25 years. So music has been figured out by computers, and it's just on a repeat loop. There's really no new innovation or nothing of note coming from music. Movies are bigger budget and more action, but they're not really there's been no culturally defining since the Lord of the Rings, really, I would say. Even he was pointing out, and I didn't do the research here, so I'm taking his word at it, but he was saying even fashion trends have like just kind of stalled. And he said if you go to a restaurant, it used to be that you'd know clothing from the 70s and from the 80s. And he said that, by and large, even fashion has just kind of been on autopilot. And it got me really thinking about what it is that we're trying to accomplish when we talk about Christian culture, conservative culture, and a lot of what we have had to do because we've been living in negative world is reject or react against or respond to woke culture or DEI culture. And so some of the best examples of building culture that we get, Nate, you can put the picture of the movie poster on the screen, is we get things like the Daily Wire's Lady Ballers, right? Which, okay, great, fine, funny movie, I guess. I didn't see it. But this is a reaction movie. This is a reaction against something that's going on in culture rather than building culture. And even before the episode started, Wes and I were talking about how rough the years were back when, the best that Christianity had to offer was movies like Fireproof. And
which, for the record, love the heart of the people that said,
100%.
We're going to make an explicitly Christian movie. We're going to put a gospel message in there. We're going to do our best. So we're not here like, so you actually did try to make some culture and it was terrible and can't believe it.
Yep.
Praise God for the energy and the heart behind it. But like we're going to talk about, there's just a piece of the puzzle missing.
Yep. Yeah. So for lots of reasons that are understandable, I'm not here just to necessarily throw shade like we have been. And as we found out with the USAID, and the funding of all these wicked and counternatural impulses, like we actually, Christians and conservatives have actually been fighting against a wave and an effort to create aberrant and distorted culture. And so it's not necessarily... it's understandable why some of our response to culture has been reactionary. We have to reject the woke. We have to reject the gay. We have to reject, the feminist, and yet it leaves us at this point that I think is catching some of us off guard, where, as Joel said in the cold open, the tailwinds. Right? Maybe we're at a moment now where we can stop reacting and start actually creating something. The last thing I wanted to say about this, just kind of by way of introducing the topic, is, I don't know, this week or last week, we talked about the idea that Christians tend to view the gospel as countercultural. And we talked about that in one of the previous episodes recently. And I heard growing up all the time, Christianity is countercultural. The gospel is countercultural. Everything about the Bible and the Bible's message is countercultural. And so we had this phrase that we coined in the 90s and the 2000s, the economy of mercy, which I understand what we're saying. Oof. There was a good Switchfoot song about that at the time. But this idea that everything in the kingdom is upside down from what we would see here in the world. And of course, there's like so many things, there's a spiritual reality and a spiritual truth there. But after the episode, I was thinking about that a lot. And I thought, if a Christian is told that the gospel in the Bible is, by definition and always, countercultural, then there's no place for Christianity in building culture.
Right.
There's no place in thinking as a conservative or as a Christian of how I'm going to build culture, because
if you actually had a Christian culture
yes.
In society at large, then the church would have to be antagonistic to it.
100%.
It's basically the church just saying, it's the same as liberals. You lick your finger, stick it up in the air and see which way the wind is blowing so that you can go with it. But if we're not careful, Christians can be merely contrarians where we just do the opposite. We're still licking our finger, putting it in the wind, seeing which direction the wind is blowing, and then we just determine the opposite. Yep. So if you actually have a Christian culture in society at large, then the church actually has to embody some kind of anti-Christian culture, which, to be frank, I think that is kind of what conservatives have done, and we've got to find a way to shake it. This is part of what I'm probably going to be discussing at the New Christendom Conference coming up in June. I'll be one of the speakers there. I'm honored to go back and do that now for a second time. But my talk from last year when they had me was, I talked about, basically the whole point was you win by winning. It was pretty simple, but quite novel for many Christians, even today, still haven't quite got the memo, but especially midway, summer of last year, that was, I think a lot of people were tempted to, they just had this mindset of we win by losing. Like it's an over-realized doctrine of, theology of the cross, and over-realized suffering, kind of a John Piper poverty gospel, so like you win by losing, you win by dying, and so then all of a sudden, Christianity can become, in a sense, suicidal, because you actually think that that's the goal. You actually think that that becomes the metric for success, is how much are we being persecuted. Baptists are notorious with this. Baptists have a very unusual, peculiar relationship with persecution. On the one hand, they fear it more than anything else, right? There's so many Baptists who are like, we can't, I remember in 2022, advocating for Christian nationalism, and Baptists were some of the biggest opponents to that idea. And they're like, we can't have Christian nationalism because if we do, then, if you have a state that's Christian, then they're going to start, inflicting punishments and persecution on the Baptists, for not baptizing our babies. We're going to get flogged or beaten or thrown in jail. And I'm like, even when you look historically, when those things actually did happen, you're talking about the numbers are so small, especially by comparison when you think of all the abuses under secular humanism, right? This idea, this myth of neutrality, by having a neutral state, a it's not Christian, it's not, it's a secular state. Well, what happened? What's the worst that could happen under that? I don't know, maybe 70 million dead babies, right? And you're like, honestly, if a few Baptists get flogged, well, I would take that personally. If it means that me and a couple other dozen Baptists are mistreated, yes. Is that sin? Yes. Would that be wrong? Yes. But I'd take that any day of the week over 70 million dead babies.
Like a grown man being sore for a couple days versus the death of a child.
Yeah. So anyways, Baptists have this weird relation. On the one hand, the Baptist is notoriously afraid of persecution. The Baptist has the loser theology runs so deep in the Baptist mind that because that's a funny thing, is that, like, again, back to 2022 and the Christian nationalism debates that were happening online, Baptists outnumber Presbyterians in our country 10-1, and yet the loser theology runs so deep they inherently believed that if we had a Christian state, it would be Presbyterian, it would be Paedo-Baptist instead of Credo-Baptist. 10-1, we outnumber them. And they're thinking, yeah, but if the state becomes Christian, it'll be some other brand of Christianity because we're Baptist and we lose. We lose, right? That's like, if there's anything the Baptists do, it's they baptize upon a profession of faith and they lose, right? That's the MO. On the other hand, back to this relationship with persecution that's so weird, I can't quite comprehend it. They're afraid of persecution more than anything in the world, and it's also their secret fantasy, like their greatest aspiration. The Baptist, silent, quiet, unspoken, greatest ambition and dream that he could possibly have is that one day he would be, John Bunyan and imprisoned, for preaching without the proper, papers. And so it's like the Baptist is terrified of persecution, sacralism, or whatever you want to call it. He's terrified of persecution, and also he's rooting for it. He's in the same breath. It's like we can't do that because if we had a Christian state, Baptists would be persecuted more than an anti-Christian state. Yes. Number one, I don't know how your math adds up with that. But then number two, we can't do it because Baptists would be persecuted if we had a Christian state. And then ... the fine print is, and also that would be awesome. So anyways, all that being said, the Baptist is committed. I said one thing, but to be fair, it's two: baptizing upon a profession of faith and ensuring that we lose in every meaningful battle that you could possibly undertake. That's kind of where we are. So all that being said, Baptists, it was a lot of Baptists that were against Christian nationalism. They also, around that same time, and still to this day, are very much against Christian culture. They don't want a broader Christian culture because they think that a Christian culture means that it necessitates a nominal Christian culture, and a nominal Christian culture will produce nominal Christian institutions, nominal Christian seminaries that will train nominal Christian pastors with nominal Christian doctrine, so that you'll have nominal Christian gospel proclamation, so that you'll have ultimately a bunch of you'll have an epidemic of false assurance. You'll have a bunch of people who think they're Christians but they're not, and I reject that. I outright reject it. Basically, to sum it up, to make it simple, what they're saying is that a Christian state would necessitate a faithless church. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I don't know how you, in principle, like now you can point historically to certain periods in time where that happened, where you had a Christian state, it was a Christian society at large, and the church, whether it be in England, or something like, and the church chose to embrace certain abuses or compromises or things like that. So that is possible that you could have this overlap where Christianity is not just within the church, but there's Christianity in the government as well, in the state, in the civil realm. And then the church gets lackadaisical, or the church gets too big for its britches, and starts to put into play indulgences, or things like that. So there are historical moments where that's happened, but in principle, there's nothing biblical that necessitates, as a principle, that a faithful state means that you must have, therefore, a faithless church. Mm-hmm. I'll say that again. Biblically speaking, historically, you can point to case studies. There will always be anomalies, okay? But that's experience. So in practice, you can find examples. But in principle, not practice, but in principle, there is no biblical principial argument that says a faithful state necessitates a faithless church. Nothing. Right. You can't make that argument from the scriptures. So then as Christians, should we want the state to be anti-Christian, or should we want it to be Christ-esteeming? And I would think that it would be the latter, that given those two choices, we would want a state that exalts Christ rather than blasphemes Christ. And so then if you can accomplish that by the grace of God, and it has been accomplished before, so this is not mere theoretical talk. We're talking about something that I believe, first and foremost, the Scripture supports. And secondly, not only do we have a principle from Scripture to support it, but we also have, in this case, both. We have the principle from Scripture and the history. There are moments where you have had a Christian state. And so if it's happened before, and we're not talking about something that happened 3,000 years ago, if it's happened before in our history, in our recent history, and here in these United States, so it's happened before, it's happened recently before, and it's happened here before. If that's the case, then I believe that by God's grace, maybe it could be achieved again. And if/when it's achieved again, then conservatives and Christians, and I know it's hard, guys, but even Baptists, if we have a Christian state and a broader Christian culture, Baptists will have to find a way to embrace Christian culture within that macrocosm and not be just a contrarian as a microcosm within it. And I feel like that's all, my whole life, that's all Reformed Christianity has been. That's literally all. It's which microcosm are you a part of, right? So you have the macro is seeker-sensitive Christianity. So then the micro is John MacArthur. But if you're really, it's like Inception, like Leonardo DiCaprio. But if you're really enlightened, then you'll be a dream within a dream within a dream. You'll be a microcosm within a microcosm within a micro. So it's like you've got seeker-sensitive Christianity at the macro level. Then you got John MacArthur. But then once John MacArthur picks up enough momentum and he's got a big enough ministry, well, now you need a contrarian for John MacArthur, who is already a contrarian to the large, And so now you have the anti-seeker sensitive, but also anti-John MacArthur, but and then it just splinters and splinters and splinters and splinters, and every group is just merely a contrarian reaction to the other group. Nobody's actually building anything. We're just all pointing and criticizing everything. No one's building anything. You're just criticizing everything. And that's where we are. And the last thing I'll say is I think part of that is because of the bad theology and things I've already addressed. But I think also part of it is because we're so used to losing. We're so used to the majority being against us. We are so pessimistic in our view of the world. We ultimately we think that we really do believe that we lose down here. And so that said, what do you do if God in his providence decides to shake things up? And it looks like that might be what's happening. I understand that there's a lot of people, who think it's all just a psyop, the nothing ever happens bros, like this is, Trump's got you right where he wants you. He's just making you think, this and that, but really he's going to, he's about to pull the rug out from underneath you, and it's going to be even worse than Kamala, and yeah, sure, that's a possibility. But for a moment, could we just consider, what if it's not? Like, what if at the larger level, culturally, with society as a whole, beyond merely the church, what if things are improving? What if things are improving? And if that's the case, then Christians have to shift. And this is kind of what I want to talk about at New Christendom Press. Christians will have to shift from survival mode to taking the next hill and securing the next victory, and then moving on and going for more. Going for broke. I think, all this back to our topic today with culture, I think part of the reason we don't have much of a culture is because culture creating requires a high risk tolerance. It requires risk. So even when I think historically of great cultural, people always say, like, white people don't have culture. It's like, have you seen an opera, a symphony, a ballet? Have you been to France? Have you been to England? Like, what do you mean white people don't have a culture? White people have an incredible culture. And not just an incredible culture among all these other cultures that are equally incredible. No, not every culture is equal. And European culture, for the last 1,000 years, has been in large part a superior culture, precisely because, not despite, but because it has been so heavily influenced by the Christian gospel and the Christian faith. We have had, not only have we had a culture, we've had an incredible culture, but it's been the dominant culture for so long that it's like a fish swimming in water. Two fish swimming by, and one of them says, the water sure is nice today, and the other one says, what's water? So what is Christian culture? What is European culture? What's white culture? Because we've been living in it like a fish in water, where it's all for centuries. But my point is that during so much of these moments where Christendom is shining, or as Bunyan, to use him as an example, John Bunyan in Pilgrim's Progress, he would say, when religion is walking through the streets and being praised by the populace on the sidelines, and she's walking in her robes and her glass slippers, she's well adorned, she's appreciated rather than despised. In those moments, which we have had many in European and American culture throughout Christendom over the past several centuries, in those moments, here's one of the things that you have. You have tailwinds. And with tailwinds comes prosperity, opulence, and with that comes opportunity to where you can afford to risk. So like when you look back and you think, who are some of the great minds, or like not just with theology, Jonathan Edwards, Martin Luther, but even when you look at beyond that, again, culture, like when you look at music, Beethoven, Mozart, like what's one thing that they have in common? They're all rich. Like sometimes I think, like, how did Luther afford to write all the time? Oh, that's right, he had servants.
Yeah.
How could Edwards just sit and go on his horse for 12 hours and think all day? Oh, slaves.
There were a lot of writers who were impoverished, but
yes,
but they gave up some of the other things in order to produce their art.
Right.
They gave up family life.
They created a surplus, whether it was depriving themselves of relationship or of temporal comforts or whatever. But in order to create culture, you have to take risk. And in order to take risk, you have to have an opportunity. You have to have a surplus. And I think, so when you think of recent conservative Christian culture, this is what you think of. You think of homesteading.
Right.
Well, what is homesteading? What does that spring out of? Oh, I know what that springs out of. That springs out of thinking the world's about to end. That springs out of, I've got 5 kids. I need to be able to feed them when China invades, or whatever. And so, in addition to my 40-hour-a-week job, we're doing a garden in the backyard, and who are we learning from? Who's inspiring us? A guy who is self-sufficient by homesteading, and what he neglected to include is the fact that he actually made all of his money in software engineering. Behind every homesteading wife on Instagram is a man who works in software, and seriously, all of them. But I read this book called, I won't say it because I don't want to, disparage him. Yep, that guy too. All of them. So the point is, I'm not, trying to poo-poo. You want to just start good habits and do something together as a family, touch grass, learn where your food comes from. There's plenty of good reasons to do it. I don't think practically for survival. Like if you just practically want to survive, if everybody's starving, then your neighbors are going to get into your garden, right? Have you ever read Peter Rabbit? I'm familiar with that book. That's what's going to happen. So if it's just survival, go to Costco, buy a bunch of the buckets, lock it up in your garage, and there you go. There's your survival. But there are good reasons to homestead and get your chickens and get this and get that. One, to have food that's not poisoned. That makes sense. But in addition to that, just to do something as a family and to teach good work habits and there's plenty of virtue reasons besides just mere survival practical reasons. But here's my point. I think that not historically, so now I'm shifting to the microcosm, recently over the last decade and a half, as we've gone, Aaron Renn's, positive, neutral, and negative world, as we've shifted into negative world, a lot of conservative thinking, if there is any conservative culture whatsoever, it's all been built around survival. It's all been built around a minority mentality, a remnant mentality. And so those are the scriptures that get the limelight is, little flock, a remnant, the few, the proud, and this survival kind of mentality, and how to be off the grid, or here's a parallel economy, right? So then the businesses that do start, it's, the big thrust is not necessarily having an innovative product, but simply, hey, you don't want to support, woke guys who hate you, do you? So give your money to us. Well, okay, what do you provide? Well, we provide a product exactly like theirs, except a little bit lower quality and a higher price.
And an American flag on the tag.
And
to be
an
fair.
American flag, right? Exactly. But then whenever there's some serious conservative, issue, you can count on us, not to support it and actually turn on our own base, like Black Rifle Coffee did with Kyle Rittenhouse.
Right.
Conservative, like with conservatives like these, who needs liberals? So all that being said, I think that we're entering into a period where, for the first time in a while, we're about to have some serious, I think we have them now, and it's only going to pick up, not headwinds, but tailwinds. And with tailwinds comes a surplus. And with surpluses, we must be able to shift the mindset from survival culture to thriving culture. We now have excess. We can afford to, not just conservatives, what's your culture? Homesteading in the backyard. No, we can actually take risks. We could actually produce great art. We could do things like Christendom past, when it was like, how did that guy afford all the time of the day to write? Well, because he actually had some means, and he had other people that he could afford to pay to do menial tasks. Like, we are entering that season of life, not because we're bringing back slaves. I'm not saying that, but through whether it's AI
slaves.
That's what I'm
There you
saying.
go, yeah.
So technologically, so whether it's AI, the fact that you have JD Vance, who just now basically today canceled cancel culture. He said, yeah, I disagree with what that young guy said under a pseudonym. I think that's atrocious, but he shouldn't have his life ruined. Elon, I think you should hire him again. And then Elon said, yep, I think we're going to bring him back.
Yep.
And he's getting a second chance. So if we're not in survival mode because cancel culture is dissipating and the economy may be improving, and your workplace may not be going into a den of lions where the slightest slip up and you're fired. If all these things are changing, if we really are going to deport millions that are a drain, a constant burden on our wallets, and all of a sudden everybody has a little extra money in their pockets, a little lighter step, skipping their step, a little less worry about being canceled and having their lives ruined, then homesteading probably shouldn't be our culture moving forward. I know why it was, looking back. It probably shouldn't be moving forward. Even guys, like I so appreciate Andrew Torba. I really do. And people will be like, oh, you're endorsing Andrew Torba. Well, he said this anti-Semitic thing, or he said, well, this is where I wish I physically had a copy of the Donald Trump card, that says, who cares, right? You can play this card, and everybody has to just buzz off. Look, I don't agree with everything that Torba says, but I believe he's a Christian brother. I love him and appreciate him, and I'm not going to be ashamed of him. So publicly, I like Andrew Torba. Deal with it. I don't know what to tell you. That said, during negative, like the height of negative world, he started Gab, a parallel economy, business for free speech. This is what most conservatives would be tempted to do and would have done. All of a sudden, the wind starts shifting. The vibe shift is happening. Think about this. Elon Musk buys Twitter, turns it into X, and starts loosening up, fires 90% of the staff, gets rid of the fact checkers and replaces them with community notes. And right now, even today, is like, yeah, I'm going to hire back that guy that the left tried to cancel. We're no longer going to cancel our own. You would think that someone like Torba, he would have practically speaking, every financial incentive to say it's just a psyop, Musk, and just post every single day. Right? I mean, this is what he's known for anyways. Why not lean into it? Just post every single day the picture of Musk wearing the tiny hat and going to the magical wall and praying, and pictures of Trump. Torba didn't do that. He refused to be a contrarian. He refused to be a incessant black pillar. And this isn't just somebody who has those convictions. His livelihood is tied up in this. Because think about this. If X really does become a free speech platform like it is currently, then who needs Gab? Who needs Gab? You are literally working for your number one competitor by encouraging Elon and working with him. Who does that? That is so counterintuitive. You want to talk about being countercultural? Who does that? I'll tell you who. Christians who actually don't just want to win personally, but actually want to see the glory and the fame of Jesus win. They want the knowledge of the glory of God to cover the whole earth as the waters cover the sea. Torba actually wants to win, even if it means him personally. It's almost like I'm not making a one-to-one comparison. It would be blasphemous. Just I want to paint the picture in your mind. This is a much lesser degree, but similar concept. When Jesus comes on the scene, John the Baptist says, he must increase. I must decrease. And it's like Elon Musk comes on the scene, who is not Jesus. Understand the analogy. It's merely an analogy. And Torba, instead of saying, he's trying to pull the wool over your head, this is actually a psyop. He's actually, he wears the tiny hat. He's actually a Zionist. Instead, he says, all right, maybe Gab has served its function, right? There was a season where we needed Gab. It was the only place we had. But if the whole world can speak freely, that's better. I want what's better for humanity and for the glory of God, not just for Andrew Torba. And that's the position he took. Conservatives are going to have to think like that. And for some of you guys, it's going to mean that durable trades is not actually going to be the focus for the next 4 years. And I understand why it was for the last 4 years, but it may not be the next move. Durable trades, chickens in the backyard. I should start a Gab account. Are we posting enough on Rumble? Because all of a sudden, survival culture doesn't have to be our fate. Thriving culture with a surplus, with tailwinds that allows for risk taking. And it's people who take risk. That's your great artist that set culture for centuries. It's the guy who took a risk. It's the musician who did something new, innovative. And honestly, people who are barely hanging on, people impoverished, people afraid, people scared, they don't set culture because culture requires art. Great art requires courage. And we are now in the promise of God being placed positionally where we can exercise courage without it meaning the end of our family and our children. And so I think we're going to see more conservatives and Christians stepping out, taking courage, but don't wait 10 years. The wind is shifting now. The sons of Issachar know the time. Seize it. Don't wait. Don't be late to the game. The Lord is doing something. He's doing something new. Move with God. Move with God. Let's go to our first commercial break, and we'll come right back with John Doyle. Our sponsor, Private Family Banking, wants to help you with one money move that'll implicate itself in multi-generational wealth building starting the first day. They help you to avoid taxation and to draw compound interest to your money. Now, if you're a high net worth individual, someone who has maybe even $10 million in net worth, then they can help you even more. W-2 workers, contract workers, business owners, it's all about cash flow and making tax-deferred gains on all your money for the rest of your life. Don't avoid this. It's a big move, but it's a great time to make it. Click the link below and you can get on Chuck DeLauderante's calendar, and he'll go over your background and what you want to accomplish. And he's going to help model a program that exactly fits your needs. So go ahead and send an email to chuck@privatefamilybanking.com. Again, that's chuck@privatefamilybanking.com, or you can click the link below. Make a free discovery call now.
America is a country that was founded for the purpose of allowing Christians to do their duty before God, not to have their consciences ruled by the doctrines and commandments of men. Reese Fund exists in order to see the 10 Commandments properly applied, not just as a plaque on the wall, but to actually be used in business as though they're commandments from God that we're supposed to obey. Our goal is to find businesses and to buy them and to build them up. We want to find manufacturing businesses and use them to make sure that we can maintain our capacity to do things here. Reese Fund, Christian capital, boldly deployed.
All right, we're so back. Here we are. We've got John Doyle. He's going to be joining us. Let's just make sure the tech is working. John, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Great fit.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself. What do you do? How can people follow you? Let's start with that.
Sure. Yeah, I just talk about politics on the internet. And if you have any interest in that, you can find me at youtube.com/John Doyle or Twitter @Comrade Doyle.
Cool. All right. So I've got Michael Belch and Wesley Todd with me. Michael has kind of outlined this episode, and he's got some questions queued up that he wants to ask you.
Sure.
Thanks for joining us today, John. In preparation for the episode, we listened to the video that you did about a year ago on why conservatives suck at culture. And one of the things that you mentioned in that video was that part of it was because we live in a time then where degeneracy is promoted and promulgated and pushed. And one of the big questions that we're trying to answer with this episode is, even before we get into culture making and why it matters, are we seeing for the first time in a while a time where true culture, which is the admiration of the good, the beautiful, and the true, can that have a hearing in the public square now? Is what Trump is seeking to tear apart and undo? Are we seeing the dawn of possibly conservatives and Christians being able to, like you said in the video, like it has to be profitable for culture makers to some degree to make the culture, or else they won't be able to. Are we on that tipping point, do you think?
I think we could be, in a very real sense, simply because so much of what has allowed these people to spread evil and ugliness throughout society is that they are rewarded for doing this monetarily. And through Trump attacking something like, that U.S. aid program, which is literally just like a patronage network that pays all sorts of activists and NGOs and people who are right now responsible for making culture very, very handsome salaries to just spread ugliness and evil throughout society. If that incentive goes away, these people are going to be unemployed, and they probably all have significant student debt. And so their lives are going to be ruined because they've been living in service of evil. And when that goes away, when you no longer are just walking throughout society and seeing such evil and ugliness like pushed in your face, I think that people will tend to sort of heal and go back to making things that are more wholesome and reflective of a more wholesome spirit, which really is just what culture is. I mean, I think it's just a natural reflection of the spirit of the people. And if that spirit is corroded and polluted, it's going to look a certain way. But if it's allowed to sort of exist and become more wholesome, then it's going to exist in a much more wholesome way, which is, I think, what we've seen for a very long time in this country until the past maybe 60 years or so. And so I'm optimistic on the basis of that. And I think people too are just repulsed by it. I mean, they're sick of having to see like these like fat models on billboards in Times Square. They're sick of seeing, children treated like prostitutes in Netflix programs. They're just like fed up with it, but they didn't really have an avenue for reproach until, thankfully, by the grace of God, this administration.
Yeah,
well said.
I think it's profoundly encouraging because, like you said, with the patronage network and the money going away, like right-wing propaganda, like what is it? A loving family, a father going to work,
Right.
a family attending church. The point is, it's free. It's free to make children, for example. So it's really free, and it's just living life that encourage people to pursue the good, the true, and the beautiful. And then the other side to make people think that flat, fat black women in Calvin Klein is beautiful. Well, that takes millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Right.
So that's really encouraging that our stuff, free, easy, wonderful, awesome, enjoyable to do. And for them to do it, it required decades of setting up some type of infrastructure to even support for, I don't know, 2-3 years, maybe. People may be believing like, oh yeah, being gay is just the same as being straight. And it all came collapsing down anyway. So I'm profoundly encouraged by that.
Right.
Yeah, and something like that could only exist with people tuned into screens all day, every day, which we are. It's just the way our society is. And for that propaganda to be just pushed in your face at all times could, like you said, sustain that suspension of belief for maybe 3 years or so. But I mean, once push came to shove, it all collapsed pretty quickly, and people are tired of it.
Yep.
John, in that video that I mentioned of yours earlier, which to our audience, if you want a really great listen, that video was fantastic on John Doyle's YouTube channel.
Do you remember the title, John?
Well, thank you for saying that. Yes, the video was titled "Why Conservatives Can't Create Culture," I think. Something like that.
I think that's right. Yep. So two things that you said in that video. I'm wondering if they've changed now, given the current cultural and political climate, or not. One of the things that you said was when you were in college, a lot of the, especially the white students who were having to take the required DEA class, DEI class, sorry, not DEA, they would do what they had to do to get a passing grade, but they just were not buying it. They were not retaining it. It was really just water off the duck's back. And you went through some of the statistics about the people who think that the founding fathers were villains. And really, you said like the majority of culture of the nation, actually most people don't. The other thing that you said was culture is the production of the soul of a society. And so I'm wondering how you would rate American society right now. Are we capable right now of producing good, meaningful culture? Is the soul of society, has most of this, the events of the past 5-10 years been water off the duck's back, or do we have to do some repair to the soul of the society before we can expect really any sort of meaningful culture to start being produced?
To answer the second half first, I think that we absolutely can, now that the boot is kind of being removed from our necks. And I think that what really, like what people regard as high culture or things that become very popular are started because of those, 1 in 1 million examples of people who are very talented and gifted in their particular fields, awarded those gifts by something divine. And when they're allowed to express that and people are allowed to, gravitate towards that, that ends up creating cultural traditions which define our society. And I think what we've experienced in the last few decades is what people are calling, stuck culture. We seem to be stagnant. We're just taking the same thing and repackaging it and releasing it, whether that's popular film franchises or tropes in literature. I mean, when's the last time like a good book was published? Like people are reading, slop from the New York Times bestseller list or stuff that you can pick up in an airport bookstore, but nothing really seems to be profound. And I think, to be honest with you, a lot of that is just simply related to our immigration policy. Because you are importing literally tens of millions of people who have never experienced American culture, which means they haven't been around long enough to sort of see the rhymes and the repetitions to where they wouldn't want to participate in it. And then also they're coming from parts of the world which frankly are just less intelligent on average. And so they are willing to sort of go into the movie theater for the millionth time to watch the superhero movie, because to them it's like always going to be a new experience. Whereas people who are maybe a little bit more intelligent, who have been in America for longer amounts of time, we're not going to just keep buying into the same slop. We require something that's a little bit fresher, a little bit more intelligent, whereas other countries just simply are not exactly producing that type of person. And in terms of the first part of the question, which was, I believe, about people buying into the sort of like self-hatred indoctrination narratives, I think that's true. And a lot of people who say that, the country's being taught to hate itself, they are coming out of an academic tradition which is just a lot older than the one we have now. And so, speaking from my experience in high school and in the tour of service I did at college before dropping out, I think it is true that the instinct to be self-hating is not something that's natural to Americans. And so, you can take a DEI class and you can learn about how everybody who ever did anything great in America was actually evil, and we have to elevate the accomplishments of everybody else who actually invented the whole world, and it was only the evil white people who found out about that and then took everything and then made it so it seemed like they invented it. You don't have people who are like ready to subscribe to that. And the types of people who are seem to already have something bad going on in their own lives, which is why if you look at the people who are the most militantly far left, like the Antifa mugshots, they all sort of look a certain way. They seem to have something going on with them that exists independently from the fact that they took a class and learned this information. Otherwise, you would see people who, didn't look like they were spiritually ill professing these same beliefs, which of course you do. It does infect everybody to a certain extent. But the point that I was trying to make in that video was basically that if you have people who are doing well spiritually, they're not going to be, ready to hop on the bandwagon for why they should hate themselves. I mean, if they've done wrong, of course, they're going to want to make right by that. But it is a certain type of person that we're creating in society, which is anxious and depressed and hollow. And they are very willing to find a way to rationalize that through indoctrination, which tells them that they can be saved by the grace of repenting for the sins of their ancestors, being defined as being really mean to Indians or really mean to Africans or what have you. And the type of person who is not spiritually maladjusted, who goes in and they're clean cut, good looking, relatively intelligent, they hear that and they laugh at it. And then it's their choice if they want to go along with it and take the A in the class or push back, play devil's advocate or what have you. But I don't think it's enough to diagnose the problem as simply like the information is bad. Like, sure, the information is bad, it's dishonest, it should be corrected. But really, I think why it's effective is downstream from a spiritual crisis that the country has been experiencing, particularly within the younger generations.
I want to follow up with that, and then I'll pass it back over to the other two guys. But as I was researching, I came across this really interesting quote. Nate, this is quote one. If you can put it on the screen. If not, I'll just read it. And this is by Jason Jewell in an article called "The Conservative Abandonment of Culture." And he's talking about a turning point in the fork of the road of conservatism in U.S. Politics. And he says this, he says, a powerful utilitarian bias in the conservative movement relegated these figures, which are the truly artistic figures, and others like them to the margins by the mid-1960s in favor of a focus on economics, business, and practical politics. This choice was a strategic error because electoral and policy victories could not check or reverse the eroding of America's moral and cultural foundations. Conservatives today tend to have, quote, unmusical personalities and, quote, feel no deep existential need for poetry, novels, paintings, symphonies, films, and such, end quote. By ceding to the left literature, the arts, and culture more generally, the fields that shape society's moral vision, conservatives unwittingly open the door to woke capitalism and cancel culture. So this is what you mentioned in your previous answer about high culture. Is it endemic to the conservative movement or even MAGA? I'm curious that we have abandoned high culture, and is that a problem? Do we need to recover it?
Yeah, I think it was absolutely a strategic error, which is why a lot of times you will see this crude attempt to mimic that by creating like these very self-referential things. Like they will say that, an example of right-wing culture would be like if we had a painting of Ronald Reagan riding a velociraptor shooting like a Mac 10 or something. And it's like, that's not exactly it's actually far closer to what you described earlier, as simply like a father and his family. Most art throughout history is actually conservative or is actually right wing, and they'll ad hoc try to describe it as otherwise, but it is true. Really, what defines like left wing art is going to be something that is in its nature revolutionary or disordered, which tends to be something that actually purposefully tries to be ugly or bad, simply to call into question, well, what even is beauty? What even is art? If I make something ugly, it's not that I'm not a talented artist, it's that I'm actually very profound because I'm calling into question what even is beauty. And it's like, this is so self-serving and foolish. So a lot of the right-wing artists that we have today are very talented, but they simply can't find work because the people who are in charge of funding these artists are not funding right-wing artists. And all of the artists that we have who are left-wing are people who are very miserable and spiritually ill. And they feel their interest, I'll put it this way, their interest in art is not so much what the classic interest in art was, which was creating something to pay respect to the divine who awarded you that talent, but more so, they are so narcissistic, they are deluding themselves into thinking that they have something to express and they have something to say. Therefore, we need some sort of communist, egalitarian, utopian society where I can somehow subsist and live and do nothing all day but create art, is what they say. I need to be able to make art because I have so much to say and so much to express that I need to be able to sit around all day and just make stuff. And it's like, that's not because you actually have anything to say or anything to express. You're just so narcissistic that you think that whatever your contribution to the world would be should be elevated to the level of Da Vinci or Beethoven or whomever. So it's a completely different kind of psychology behind what drives the impulse to express oneself in art. And the only difference is for the last 60 years, it has been the leftist impulse, which has been rewarded, and the conservative impulse, which has been punished.
Yeah. John, did you read the New Yorker article, The Cruel Kids Are Back in Town?
I did. I skimmed it.
Okay. It was really fascinating. I think it was Aaron McIntyre who commented on it. He said the right-wing aesthetic, when it actually just does it organically, so it's not trying to bring in, Reagan and the American flag and be really ham-fisted about it, we actually, just organically, coming up in this movement, whatever's happening right now, it seems at some level we just instinctually, there's a really kind of classy, vibrant, I think that would definitely be the term for what he's describing there, from the parties, the balls, the elegance, and of course there's aspects where they're, a little bit off the rails on one end to the other. But it's really interesting because they're setting aside that old kind of Republican, that old guard utilitarian. It's economics, it's culture, it's foreign policy, and we're really able. Actually, it seems like what's happening is people just. It's not even a formal movement. There's not academic work spurring it, but they're like, we're gonna dress really well. We're gonna look great while doing it. We're gonna be healthy. We're gonna look good. And surprisingly, I think people are just they're just doing it in a sense. I don't know. Was that your sense? That cover photo obviously was super popular. Just the edge and the image that it presented. Oh.
Sorry, I think I cut out for a second. I think that's just the nature of mankind. We want to root for, the strong horse over the weak horse. We like people who put effort into their appearance, things you can't fake. I mean, obviously you can fake large aspects of your appearance, but there's a difference between putting effort into how you look and what you would see at any airport nowadays, where people are just wearing sweatpants and they've got portions of themselves spilling out over their clothing. It's just disgusting and repulsive. So yeah, I saw that photo and I saw the coverage surrounding it. And I think that it's true that any time that left-wing aesthetics have clashed with right-wing aesthetics throughout history, right-wing aesthetics have always won because they're reflective of something real and hierarchical and natural, and left-wing aesthetics pretty much define themselves in opposition to all of those things. They seek to be disruptive and offensive, which when you're a child, that's attractive to you because, you want to be 12 on a skateboard and flip people off and, be rebellious. But once you get a little bit older and you start taking things a little bit more seriously, you sort of fall into place and realize that that's all immature. And anybody who retains those attitudes past adolescence are, as we mentioned with the Antifa mugshots, always very disturbed, dysfunctional people.
Yeah.
Michael?
I'm just curious, when you say right-wing and left-wing art has conflicted, do you have any offhand examples? That's a really interesting idea to me.
No, not really. I'm not an artist. I really don't have any interest in art or art history. But from what I browse on Twitter and from what I see people who do understand these things talk about, that seems to be the popular sentiment. And I guess if you can just sort of tap into the cultural zeitgeist, so to speak, and what you would regard to be something that leftists think is very, profound, very high art, it does tend to be these things that are deconstructive and revolutionary, and they seek to, portray a caricature of white American Christian society, and it is always vilified, and they always have to have it lose against something that is more enlightened, be that because of inferior cultures or science or what have you. And the opposite would be the case for truly conservative or right-wing art, where it is glorifying and upholding these things which have shaped our culture, as opposed to denigrating them, or as opposed to the sort of other fork where they will then try to create like a conservative art that's like a film about fighting off a school shooter because self-defense, but then the person fighting off the school shooter is actually a girl because we still have this like retained spirit of feminism. I think Daily Wire did that film a few years ago. So things like that where it wants to be on the mark, but they can't help themselves, but always kind of miss it.
Well said. Michael, are there any more quotes that you wanted to share that we could kind of spark our imagination?
I'll pull some into our conclusion.
Okay, great. Wes, any other questions that you have?
Nothing that comes to the top of my mind.
All right.
I would say too, conservatives have been way too quick the past couple of years. And John, you talked about this in your video. Anyone, it'll be John Fetterman, it'll be Nicki Minaj. They'll say something halfway just right wing or whatever,
yeah.
and we're so quick to be like, "What? Nicki Minaj turned down the vaccine? Based?" And we're so desperate for any semblance of, I don't know if it's identity or vision or something like that. The second someone, I think of the Young Turks, she's like, "Oh, I don't feel a little bit safe walking in my neighborhood." We'll be so quick to latch onto that and to prop it up and be like, "See, we're the party that is common sense," and even these people are coming into it. But if you have a good, thick culture, it needs to be almost resistant to change. People are going to be wanting to get in to join. It's like, no, actually, your views, your thoughts, your aesthetic, the things you've said in the past, they don't fit in. This is much more carefully managed and curated. And for now, at least, you don't belong.
Yeah.
I think there's something, John, to be said for, now, this is not sustainable. It's not viable long term, but it's something that we can use to our advantage temporarily to kind of as a springboard to launch into a solid conservative Christian culture that actually has merit and can stand the test of time. But a training wheels, if you will, to teach us, to give us some of the momentum to learn how to ride the bike again, is just the inevitable phenomenon of that the cool kids. So like back to what you were saying, like the 12-year-old on the skateboard flipping off the neighbors as he's bombing the hill, whatever in the neighborhood. Well, you can use that to your advantage. Like Facebook, I think Warren McIntyre said this, used this analogy, but there was a time when your grandma couldn't have Facebook, and so it was cool. There was a time where you had to have the college email, even to get a Facebook, and then everybody has it. Like at this point, like for us, even with Right Response, we just kind of gave up on Facebook. We did Facebook for a while and we just kind of stopped. And same with Instagram. I think Instagram is different than Facebook. Facebook is kind of like for senior citizens, but Instagram has a younger crowd, but it's predominantly women. And, like on our YouTube channel, I think it's like 87% of our audience is male. Women don't really like me very much. So Instagram's not really a great platform for me to be on because it's just stepping into a lion's den. And not really a lion's den, more of like a cat fight, a house cat den. But anyways, all that being said, I think we've hit the point now where being a leftist isn't cool. Like so like when your grandma gets a Facebook, once it's gone everywhere, like it's the same with crypto, like when your grandma asks you how she can buy Bitcoin, like maybe you sell, or at least for a while. And I think like at this point, everybody is, everybody's like, thinks, like, white people are racist and the world is chauvinistic and misogynist and blah, blah, like, and there's a certain point where I feel like Gen Z, like 40% of them are going to be, like gay furries. But the other 60% are like shockingly conservative, like alarmingly conservative, like all the time. Like me and some of my friends with like New Christian Press and other guys, like people hate us, on the internet, and we're like, wait till you meet our kids. Like you think like you will beg for us to return and try to, get our kids under control. Like, please, like, our kids think that we're normies. Our kids are like, so anyway, so I think like the tide is turning. There's a point where something gains so much critical mass that it's no longer cool, to just toe the bottom line and to keep in step. And so I think like we're kind of hitting a point now where wokeness, whatever you want to call it, the liberal order has one, it's been just the veil has been lifted and it's been proven to be such a farce. But also it's not just that it's being revealed for being ugly and terrible and monstrous and all those things which are true, but also it's just it's predominant. It's predominant, and anybody who just goes with the flow, that's what you're doing. You're just going with the flow. There's nothing unique. There's nothing original. There's nothing novel. There's nothing that would stand out. It doesn't require any courage. It doesn't, and so there's little reward. Whereas right now on the right, like, yeah, cancel culture, but cancel culture is fading, and now it's kind of like a reward culture, right? So like you don't get canceled on the left. But I think we're hitting a point in the like the third act in the musical where on the left, there's still safety, but there's you don't have any risk, but you also have zero reward. Whereas on the right, it was all risk, and zero safety and zero reward. Well, now the right is still less safe, but the risk is actually lessening, and now there's just. I feel like every week there's an example or a case study or a story that drops where some guy on the right who took a risk, who did the right thing, is being publicly, internationally accredited with fame and reward, whether it's Daniel Penny or
Yep.
and I think as that starts to happen, and it's still the minority opinion, the younger generation is going to want to be on that team. They're not going to want to be on their grandma's team. They're going to want to, praise God, boomers are probably not the best horse to bet on, but I think I'm super hopeful when it comes to Gen Z. I think 40% of them, like I said, are gay furries, and you can read the statistics for that. They'll be dead by 35, and the other 60% are super based and are taking risks. What do you think?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. We even saw a very promising example of what you're describing today when you had a Gen Z, a Zoomer young man who was fired by Doge, by the Department of Government Efficiency, because he had posted some tweets where he was, making jokes that were racist or something. And popular sentiment online essentially called for him to be rehired. And then Elon Musk pulled it. JD Vance, our vice president, said that he agrees with the sentiment expressed online that he shouldn't be fired and have his life ruined because he was doxxed by some, libtard journalist. And then eventually today, Trump was asked what he thought. And he said, I agree with the vice president. So the mechanisms to cancel people, which has always been something that the left has used, always called for by the left, enforced by the left, and the right has always cowered to it. That now is not really a card that works, because the vice president and the president are saying, we don't believe in this. So if you're on the right and somebody says something that, would offend leftist sensibilities at your organization, what are you going to do? You're going to break from the vice president and the president? They just gave you a license to kill. They say you don't have to do this anymore. We don't have to be afraid of the left because they don't have power. They're not cool. And the only time they've ever been able to impose themselves are when they have that artificial sort of, nanny state, tentacles are everywhere, to where people are afraid and they just simply go along with it. They post the black square, they wear the mask. But now, if they don't have that power, yeah, you can defend yourself on the subway. Yeah, you can speak your mind. You can do whatever. You can be normal. You don't have to apologize for your ancestors. And there's nothing cool about that. Even women who are radically left-wing will date guys like me, and they can't help but be sort of attracted to how radical our politics are. Because, if men can lie about our nature, women are really bad at that, especially because maybe there's some dissonance there between what they say and how they actually behave, more so than with men. But there's nothing attractive to anybody, especially women, about thinking that everybody should just be equal and get along, and that would just be so nice. And the only thing that's bad is when people are mean and when they're saying that equality is bad. There's nothing more unattractive to people than that. And that is the governing orthodoxy of the country, or at least it was before Trump was sworn in. And I think it's going away, and it's going away very quickly. And we're all going to be much better off for it.
That's just profound. In the last 24 hours, president, the vice president, richest man in the world said, yeah, you can say things, might not agree with them. You shouldn't lose your job over it. It's done. And Vance even was like, hey, I don't ever want to see one of our guys essentially fired because a leftist news reporter dug something up. Think about that profound vibe shift 3 weeks into the administration. We're done with that. We're not canceling people for old tweets anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question. One more question, and then we'll go to our next commercial break. But so, what do you think? What should conservatives be focusing on now? Like, our first segment at the beginning of the show before you hopped on, I was saying, I was talking about Andrew Torba a little bit, who's a friend, and I was just saying that one of the things I like about him is, one, he's a Christian brother in Christ, but two, he's like, well, I'll just say it. I don't know your position on this, and you don't have to. You just be you. You don't have to abide by, our flavor. But he's what the kids would call J Pilt, and there's no secret to that. Andrew Torba has been posting, about the Jews for, I don't know, 10 years. I mean,
I wasn't even on the internet yet. And
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I was still figuring out email, and Torba's over here, saying it's the Jews, and but here's the thing. This is what I love about Torba. Trump runs, and what I always tell people, I'm a Christian pastor. I think Judaism is satanic. I hate it. It's a false religion and blasphemes Christ, and so I make no apology for that. But what I had to tell my church, and guys are like, well, but Trump is a Zionist. He wears the tiny hat. He's at the wall, and I'm like, guys, it's the year of our Lord 2025. You don't get a president in these United States who's not a Zionist. So you pick the best Zionist you have. That's just where we are. Now, all that being said, here's my point. Torba, got a lot of backlash from his own fan base, whatever you want to call it, his primary, followers, because when Trump started campaigning, Torba knows all that. He's not stupid. He knows that, he knows Trump's position on Israel and this, that, and the other, and all these things. And he just didn't care. He's again and again every day was like, no blackpilling allowed. I'll block you. Vote for Trump. He's great. I don't agree with everything. We got to, you play the hand that you've been dealt. I'm grateful for Trump. He has my vote. And then not only that, right? That's one thing politically, but then Elon, if you're the CEO of Gab, your whole business model is parallel conservative free speech, right? That's your whole thing. Your whole thing is, mainstream is bad, and don't use the platform from the people who hate you and blah blah. He would have every incentive to say Elon Musk is it's a psyop. He's controlled opposition. He's pulling the wool over your head. It's not really free speech. He'd have every single financial at the level of his wallet, providing for his family, every incentive to counter Trump and certainly to counter Elon. And then, what Torba did instead is like, yeah, this is great. X is getting better. There's still problems, but it's getting better by the day. I like Elon. I'm grateful for him. Probably not a fan of, putting neurochips in people's brains, obviously we have some differences in our worldview, but grateful for him. This is awesome. And he just supported it. And so my point, to put it to you to a question, I think that in the year of our Lord 2025, if conservatives are thinking, all right, here's the plan, homesteading, here's the plan, parallel free speech economy, Rumble, Gab, I'm like, what world are you living? You are the grandma asking at the top of the cycle how to get a wallet so you can buy some bit quarters. If you're thinking about starting, a Gab account and you're thinking about buying chickens, and I gave all my disclaimers earlier. You got kids, you want to teach them to touch grass. There's good virtue and habit building. There's plenty of reasons to do that, but we've been in survival mode, so everything's been small, remnant, survive, self-sufficiency, because you can't trust anybody and the government's going to kill you. And so, grow your own garden, get your own social media, get your own business, get all these kinds of things. I don't think that's where we are anymore. So the sons of Issachar in the Bible, they were honored for knowing the times. And I think for the first time we have not just lessened headwinds, but conservatives have tailwinds. And so I'm thinking right now, yeah, like I still have principles and virtues. I'm a Christian. So there's some things that I can't take advantage of because I think they're fundamentally, inherently ethically wrong. But anything that doesn't fall into that category, I'm gonna use everything I got. I'm gonna use whatever pieces of AI I can and do it better than everybody else and be an early adopter. I'm going to I didn't like Twitter. I didn't even start a Twitter account until Elon bought it. But as soon as that happened, I was like, yeah, I wouldn't make Elon a pastor in my church, but him owning this platform means there's going to be an opportunity here, and I could see the writing on the wall. And so I'm going to start building this out, and I'm going to. So all that being said, I don't think homesteading and Gab accounts is probably like the premier focus for the next 4 years. But I totally understand why it was. And I don't disparage anybody who did it for the last 10 years. Andrew Torba gave people like me a place to converse when free speech was completely suppressed. And so thank you, sir. So I'm not disparaging at all. I'm just saying the times are changing. And I think Torba is a great example of providing in survival time and also pivoting in thriving time. I think he's done both phenomenally. And I want to see, do you agree with that sentiment? And if so, practically for these next 4 years, what should Christians and conservatives, where should we put down our plow and start to work?
I would say, yeah, I definitely agree with being a pragmatist, with, having an insurance policy. You never want to put all your eggs in one basket, especially when you have other people who are depending on you for their livelihoods. I would say that we have a rare opportunity right now to actually dismantle the ability of these people. Like you said, we have tailwind. We have the ability to dismantle the ability of these people to destroy our country. Whereas in previous Republican administrations, it was about maybe slowing at 5% by having 4 years where our taxes were a little bit more advantageous for us, or something like that. But now we are actually dismantling the mechanisms by which these people acquire and consolidate and accumulate further power, particularly with things like elections or immigration policy. I mean, if we can achieve, because there's going to be a counterattack. It's not as though the left is going to just sit on their hands for 4 years and be like, drat, they really got us, didn't they? And then it's over. I mean, as we're seeing from these corruption leaks that are coming out, this was a multi-billion-dollar system, which was making a lot of money for so many people. It's not simply going to go away. But if we can do enough damage to not only stop the bleeding, but on our end, but prevent the counterattack 4 years later. We build up 4 years of momentum. I mean, maybe 2 years later with the midterm elections, but we build up enough momentum to where, say, someone like JD Vance is the obvious successor. The country's happy with its trajectory. We don't have, rampant voter fraud in other states. We have more poll watchers. We have the RNC totally under Trump's family, or the control of Trump's family. I mean, you create a scenario where now you can continue doing that damage, 4 years later, down the line, into where if the left gets back into power, I mean, they don't have the option to say amnesty 10 million illegal aliens and consolidate permanent electoral control. They don't have the option to keep incentivizing and rewarding the mass distribution of evil throughout the country to demoralize good people and aggrandize bad people. It's just going to be a totally different playing field. So I would say if there were ever a time to go I hate to use this, but full on blitzkrieg against these people, it would be now. And then, if it doesn't work out, then we can think about what to do later on. I mean, we're not stupid. We can figure things out pretty quickly and put things together when we need to. But I would say right now, if you're a young patriot, go get a law degree, go into debt if you have to. We'll pay it off later. We'll have some sort of debt forgiveness program for young patriots who save their country. I would say do something like that, get involved in government, become as individually powerful as possible, and use that for good.
Great. All right, we're going to go to our last commercial break for the day. But John, I just wanted to say thank you for coming on the show. We'll let you go and do what you do. If you guys aren't familiar with John's program, he puts out, you correct me if I'm out of line here, but he puts out one video per year. He records it 1 million times and until his autistic mind feels content with the product, and then he puts it out, and it's amazing. But is that fair? I mean, it's more than one a year, but I feel like, I wish you were producing more content. I know you hear that all the time. You're probably annoyed by it, but tell us, let us into your mind for a moment. Why do you not produce more content? I'm sure you have a great reason. Tell us.
No, it's a great compliment, actually. It's the biggest problem people have is I don't make enough content. Well, to be honest with you, I don't have an impulse to self-promote really, which I know is ironic because what I literally do for a living is promote myself. But I don't like social media. You know, you go to my Instagram, I post maybe once a year. And so if we're in a time where Donald Trump is not in office and I don't really see opportunity to change the course of the country, I sort of just kind of like I'll make, content because I enjoy it. I enjoy giving my opinion on things, but I don't really hit the ground running the way that I would if Trump were in office. So now that Trump is in office, I have been posting more and I will continue to do
Cool.
that. It's just a different ball game, but yeah, that your description was closer to the truth than the opposite, and so I'll let you have that one.
All right. Tell the listener one more time where they can follow your work.
Yeah, youtube.com/John Doyle, or you can find me on Twitter at Comrade Doyle. And maybe once a year I'll brighten your season or something.
All right. Cool. Thanks, John, for coming on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Here's our last commercial break for the day. All right, the clock is running out. You need to go and register now for our Christ is King, How to Defeat Trash World Conference. It's happening the year of our Lord 2025, April 3rd, 4th, and 5th. That's a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And by God's grace, we're able to provide for you an all-star lineup. We've got Steve Dace, Calvin Robinson, Orrin McIntyre, Dr. Stephen Wolfe, Eric Kahn, David Reese, Andrew Isker, John Harris, A.D. Robles, Dan Burkholder, Dusty Devers, Ben Garrett, C.J. Engel, and yours truly, Pastor Joel Webben. Come on out, join us April 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2025, Thursday through a Saturday. Go to rightresponseconference.com to register today. Again, that's rightresponseconference.com. Listen, guys, you probably listen to Right Response Ministries because you take the dominion mandate offered to us in Scripture seriously. Well, unsurprisingly, so does Dominion Wealth Strategists. As the only distinctly reformed financial consulting firm, they help Calvinistic, covenantal, and confessional Christians to steward their resources faithfully in a way that actually aligns with God's Word. Dominion Wealth leverages all corners of the financial service industry as independent brokerage agents, matching you with suitable products and services from dozens of top industry providers. Their mission is to equip believers to secure their family's future and build a legacy that glorifies God by building holistic financial strategies that include budgeting, insurance, debt management, retirement planning, estate planning, and more. In order to make wealth Christian again with a portfolio that might even put King Solomon to shame, go and take dominion over your finances today by visiting www.reformed.money and book an introductory overview right now. All of Christ for all of life and all of finance for Christendom.
All right, welcome back. So we're going to kind of wrap up our discussion here and conclude some thoughts that we had and then some comments on what John Doyle said. One of the things that I was particularly interested in with that discussion was this idea that America has an established culture. And Joel, you mentioned it in the opening bit. John Doyle mentioned it here in his interview. And the idea that there is a way of being, a way of life of the American people that has been around for a long time. And one of the things, and Nate, I don't think I sent you this quote, so I'm just going to kind of reference it here. But that same guy who wrote the article that I mentioned earlier, he talked about how there's a competing vision of what the American founding fathers did in establishing in America. And a newer idea is that they completely broke away from England. They established something brand new. It was the Revolutionary War, right? The same way we had the French Revolution, the Revolutionary War, and it was creating something entirely new, our own thing. And part of this is our individualistic impulse as Americans, right? We want to be new, we want to be ourselves. But Jason Jewell, who wrote that article that I mentioned earlier, he argues that actually the war, though it was a war between England and the colonies, the United States, he argues that the American founding fathers were actually not making a fundamental break with the old, but they carried forward the values and the assumptions, and in a lot of ways, the culture, parts of the culture that they brought from England and from Europe. And what they actually were establishing was a new way of governing themselves. But one of the things that's missing is we talk about conservative culture. And this goes back to the whole question of what is it to be a heritage American? What is the heritage of America? The culture of America, even though America has only been around 250 years coming up, the culture of America and the beauty, and like, there's a reason why when I went to England, I loved to see the castles. And we read Shakespeare still in our schools still to this day. We haven't been able to weed him out as though we needed to. But we actually are standing in a European and an English cultural perspective that I think sometimes we forget. And one of the things, and Aaron McIntyre and the conference last year, Stephen Wolfe at New Christendom, have been mentioning, this is not a new idea to me, but just if we're going to get serious about creating culture, I think we need to be careful that we don't assume that the culture that we create in this window, Lord willing, it's a long window that we have and not just 4 years. We need to be careful that we don't fall into this idea that everything that we're going to be producing now is this new culture. We actually need to be pulling and building on the good culture that the last 60, 80, 100, whatever years has been trying to erase. And we need to pull that culture back into our consciousness and into what it means to be a people. It's going to be in new ways, right? Movies certainly didn't even exist that long ago. So if we're going to make movies, obviously that's a new medium, but the messages, the values, what we consider and find beautiful and interesting, really we have a project of pulling that across a 60 or 80 year gap. Whereas in ideal times, that would be developing over time, kind of organically, as one generation passes to the next generation, passes to the next generation. We have quite a task, actually, of trying to pull some of the previous cultural assumptions, values, and art across a 60 or 80 year gap. And it has to skip over, but we have to plant ourselves in that if we're going to be serious about reestablishing what it means to be Americans and to have Christian culture.
Practically, literally, like, well, what does that mean? What does that look like on the ground? I remember growing up, my dad read to me, we read King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. I mean, this is a story from like maybe even longer, 900 years ago. And it's in Old English and all of that. And he sent me an extra copy he had for me to read with my son. Now, I could read to my son just modern stories or look for authors that are currently living. But if you're going to establish that connection to the past and to tradition, that means you're reading, your references, your framing, all of those things, you're pulling them back in. So it's consciously deciding, I'm going to read King Arthur. I'm going to read Shakespeare. I'm going to read Aristotle. I'm going to quote. I'm going to cite. I'm going to use their thinking, like literally practically on the ground. What does that mean? It means you're reading your children older books.
I still remember my youngest son right now is reading Treasure Island. And he's like, Dad, did you read this book growing up? I'm like, yeah, I read that book. I totally inspired. And so we looked into the biography of the writer that is spacing my mind right now. But he was very feeble as a child, and his father was a lighthouse designer. And so I told my youngest son about the fact that the writer of Treasure Island grew up around ships, but he was kind of weak. So then the next day, my son comes up to me and goes, Dad, do you think the fact that he was so weak, but he could see the ships coming in and out, do you think he imagined himself as Jim Hawkins on the ship? And I could tell, like, my 12-year-old son is imagining himself as Jim Hawkins on this ship. And the fact that this English writer from the 1800s had written this story that was just bedazzling and inspiring my son, like, he had a connection all the way back to Robert Louis Stevenson. That's the guy's name. And I just thought, like, this is actually the value and the power of culture. Like, he's enthralled not just in a meaningless story, but a timeless story from not exactly, but kind of our father, our grandfather culture. And I loved watching that happen over a period of a couple days. When he started the book, we did a little research, and then he came back to me with his own ideas. I mean, it was such a beautiful, beautiful thing. But to your point, Wes, you're right. It comes down to the choices that we make. There's a reason we still read Pilgrim's Progress. It's not just because it's got some good biblical stories in it. It is Anglo-Protestant culture.
Yep. Do you have thoughts?
No.
I was going to say, there's got to be a place in conservatism, I don't even like the term, Christian nationalist is better. But we do have to have a place for creatives. Like
That's true.
It's kind of right to call them gay and the nerds and everything like that, because a lot of effeminate men gravitate towards the arts. They look to music and they look to art and they look to expression and they gravitate towards those things. So we kind of pick on them. It's like, well, what do you just do? Like he makes this, indie music and he makes $30,000 a year, can barely support his family. So we pick on that. And there's a good aspect, like I said, of kind of saying like, well, come on, like what are you really producing? But once you have cultural power and people can be funded or just make a living doing it, there really has to be a place to say, like, no, he doesn't fit into the way you would traditionally, we're going to talk about masculinity, Lord willing, next week. He doesn't fit into traditionally how we would think of masculine men. He doesn't necessarily work out. Now, he takes care of himself. He's able, if he would needed to, was called upon to protect his wife and to protect his children. But he makes music for a living, or he works in software. That's not really art so much, but they have these different occupations, and we're not taking this just bucket of male and female and applying it and saying across the board, we got to have all our men being pastors, for example, or podcasters or social media wars. There are men, and they're good men, and they don't need to get on social media at all because it's just, they're too easily, they maybe have a pastoral heart, a certain kindness. They don't need to worry about it. We need to have a variety of guys doing different things, and then the ones that are genuinely making decoration and art and music and all of those things. Again, it can't be effeminate, it can't be gay, they themselves can't be. But to say, no, that's actually a really great thing you're doing, and praise God we have great music that people are listening to, and you can devote yourself to it, and we're not going to pick on you or make fun of kind of the look that you bring along with it. We have a place for that.
Yeah.
I want to, my last plug that I really wanted to mention here is in a world, and guys, go listen to the video by Doyle, because one of the sections he said was so good. He said, people don't naturally, in our fallen nature, of course, we're sinful, but we don't naturally love perversion. And he said the perversion of art and culture and society has been forced down our throats. And one of the things that we have to do to reestablish Christian culture is we have to not only love the beautiful, but we have to know what the beautiful is. And I've just been thinking about recently, why do people love classical music? Classical music actually is something of an acquired taste. It's kind of like people who don't really like coffee, and so you start with a frappuccino, and then you move down to the hazelnut latte, and then you're just in the latte, and then you get to the point where all you drink is, fair trade, organic, Americanos. Yes, exactly. Yeah. That sort of thing. Recognizing good art, beautiful, what is true beauty, sometimes is an acquired taste. And in a world of filth in art, I would bet that a lot of us, our perspective is just off on what is beautiful. And so when you listen to really great compositions or a symphony or something like that, initially it's hard to know, why do people like this? It just sounds like a bunch of instruments. And then you start realizing these are all, someone took the time to arrange all the parts, and they're all playing together, and they're playing at different volumes and in different times, and the conductor is leading and directing them. And not only that, but then the music itself, it goes through movements and it tells stories, but to appreciate all of those things, you actually have to learn a little bit about it, right? And so I guess one of my challenges is Christians, let us again love the things that are beautiful, that have endured the test of time. And Nate, I'm gonna at least close my comments with the quotes 3 and 4. So that's coming up here, quotes 3 and 4. And T.S. Eliot, this is quote 3. He said, "The dominant force in creating a common culture between peoples, each of which has its distinct culture, is religion. It is Christianity that our arts have developed. It is Christianity that the laws of Europe have until recently been rooted in." And then quote 4, this is Roger Scruton, who is a British conservative, and he said this. He said, "Design with beauty in mind, and what you create will endure forever." And we have to recapture what is beautiful. Right? When you look at modern art and you say, that's just dumb, but I'm probably missing something, reject that. right? Like, love what's beautiful, love what's true, love what's good, and learn about why it's good and true and beautiful, and start promoting that. And then maybe we have a generation where, like with the tradwives we talked about earlier in the year, they're kind of having to fake it because they didn't learn it from being a young girl, right? So they're trying to bake and they're trying to do these things, but their daughters won't have to fake it, right? It won't be new to their daughters. They will know how to do that almost instinctively. And we, by God's grace, before too long, will have again bred into ourselves and our society a love of beauty. And that starts with what you read your kids, what you have your kids listen to, what you do with your free time as a family. Just really practical things that I wanted, at least personally, to end with.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I get so sick of the incessant trope of you're faking or hypocrisy or LARPing. I preached a whole sermon one time where like the primary point was you got to LARP before you can fly. And what I'm saying is that I think it was Chesterton who said that hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. Mm-hmm. And I've said this on the podcast a few times, but I think it's profound, and it really helped for something to click in my mind to understand. I'll say it again. Hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. Hypocrisy is vice tipping the hat, as it were, to virtue. We think hypocrisy is the worst thing. It's not. What's worse is that a society and a culture where there's no need for hypocrisy because there's actually a true absence of any and all virtue. Hypocrisy, what that necessitates is that there's at least some remnant of virtue that still remains within a society to where vice at least has to pretend. At least the vice is putting on the pomp and circumstance. At least the vice is pretending. A great example of this is, again, Baptist. My God. Being a Baptist feels like, did you ever read, I think it's the Don Treader, The Hufflepuffs? Mm-hmm. And the professor who's left on the island? That's what it feels like being a Baptist. It's like, not Hufflepuffs. That's Harry Potter.
It's duffel
pods. Call it. You're done.
Or...
Duffel pods.
Yeah.
Duffel pods. There you go. I was confusing my fiction there. The problem, though, of course, is that one of those is super gay, and the other one is timeless, namely C.S. Lewis, the timeless one. So duffel pods. There we go. Get it right. But basically, he's like, yeah, they're ridiculous, but they're mine. They're my duffel pods. Yeah. This is what happened. It was the coronation of King Charles, and the Baptists, right on time, came out talking about how atrocious and terrible it was, and it's the worst thing ever. That this blasphemy of Christ, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah. Do I think that King Charles, if I had to bet on it, would I bet that he is genuinely born again, regenerate heart? That he loves the triune God, that he's really going to be a defender of the faith? No. But obviously the ideal is that you would have the shell and that also would be filled, right? That's the ideal. But I'll tell you what's not the ideal. It's not the ideal to have nothing. Better to have the empty shell than to have no true center of Christianity and virtue, and no thin veneer or external remnants of Christianity. It's better to have the mere shell of a Christendom long past than to have no shell at all. And so, all that being said, my point is that hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. LARPing, I was piggybacking off of what you were saying about the trad wife thing. That's the same thing. So like the same guys who came out about King Charles and this coronation is terrible and we shouldn't do it. This is Christian nationalism, and it's the perfect example of what Christian nationalism always has been and always will be: a facade, hypocrisy, a show. It's fake. You see it in England, and that's really what it is in America. And that's also what the whole resurgence of, the trad wife thing is, and wearing sundresses and baking sourdough bread. That's, like you're LARPing. That's not who you are. It's 2025, quit pretending, quit faking, quit LARPing, quit being hypocritical. That's what they're getting at. And the reality is this: anything in any society that's deemed as virtuous and valuable will always, like a magnet, be pulling in and attracting pretense. That's what value does. That's what virtue does. Anything esteemed by any culture, any society, any subgroup of society, any isolated community, whatever is valuable within a community, whatever is deemed as being virtuous, it won't just attract people who are good at it. It attracts everyone. What happens when skateboarding, in the 90s, and, Tony Hawk does the first 900? I remember watching it on the X Games, or whatever it was. I remember I was watching it with Nathan. He's my cousin. And I remember seeing it at his house, and we were like, whoa. And then what do you immediately do afterwards? You turn off the TV, and me and my kid cousin, we then go and LARP with skateboarding, right? We grab our skateboards. Are either of us good? No. But Tony Hawk's just did a 900. Right. My goodness. We're going out in the street. We're building our little rink-a-dink ramp, out of 2x4s and a cinder block or whatever. And by golly, we're going to skateboard, because anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Right? I mean, it's true. Anything worth doing is worth doing well as the ideal. That's what you work up to. That's where you want to get. But really, anything worth doing, not only is it worth doing well, but it's worth doing poorly. Meaning it's so worthwhile. It's worth doing even if you're not good at it. It's worth doing for a season while you're particularly poor at it until you get good at it. Think about that, like LARPing. What is LARPing other than, because here's the thing, it'd be one thing if everybody was lying. That's different. Lying is different than LARPing. So if everybody was saying, I am an 11th century crusader. I am King Arthur. I am Sir Lancelot. I am Duke Godfrey, right? I am Vlad the Impaler. That's literally who I am. And I have impaled this many Muslims for the Lord Jesus Christ. Find that guy for me, right? Because I'm under the impression that guy doesn't exist, right? You want to talk about LARPing? The anti-crusaders are the ones that are LARPing. If there's a guy who really is claiming to be King Arthur, and really is claiming to have killed, this many, Turks or Danes, in the case of King Arthur, then sure, that guy's an idiot. But what I've witnessed is not guys who are lying, but guys who are trying, not lying, but trying. And why is it trying instead of just doing it perfectly? Because we're exercising muscles that have been silenced and atrophied for decades because of evil men. Because of evil men with a post-war consensus, the post-liberal order, because of globalism, because of the whole Marxist facade of you don't want to be a racist, you don't want to do this, you don't want to do that. Then what we've done, right? Who was it? He died of cancer recently. Great comedian.
Norm Macdonald.
Norm Macdonald. Right? He had a joke. And he was saying it as a joke on a live program, and the host just agreed with him, not knowing that he was joking. But he said, the thing that scares me the most about a terrorist attack, is that if a terrorist attack, killed, and he was very specific in this joke, but he's like, if a terrorist attack, did something that killed, millions, I think he said millions. You can go back and listen to it, but I think he said 1 or 2 million Americans at some, big event or whatever, and 1 or 2 million Americans were killed. What scares me the most about that is that for years there would be an anti-Islamic sentiment And the host
Against-
not knowing that against Muslims, and the host not knowing that he was joking was like, I totally agree. I think he was on The View. He was on The View or something. It was like, I don't think it was Whoopi Goldberg, but it was, like one cackling hen, they're all the same. So there's some cackling hen like Whoopi Goldberg or Joy Reid or, somebody like that. And they're like, oh yeah, me too. And the point that he was making, it was great because they hook, line, and sinker, they fell right into the trap. But the point that he was making is that we have been so hamstrung by this post-liberal order of tolerance and be anti-racist and globalism and egalitarianism. Everybody's the same. Just people are just interchangeable widgets. Nobody's any different. There's zero hierarchy. There's zero patriarchy. There's zero nationalism. There's no transcendence. There's no absolute truth or God above or hell below. There's none of that. And we've been so. That's you want to talk about the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages. That's just an anti-Christian psyop. The Enlightenment is the true Dark Ages. That's the true Dark Ages. And that demonic spell has come over Westerners, Western Christians, and we fell for it. We all fell for it. And so now that just a few of us are starting to wake up, then what does it look like to honor your father, your ancient fathers, your spiritual fathers, your ecclesiastical fathers, these fathers? What does it look like to honor King Alfred? What does it look like to honor Duke Godfrey? What does it look like to honor the Puritans, the Covenanters, the Reformers? What does it look like to honor the church fathers and Origen and Athanasius and Augustine? Like, what does it look like to honor these kinds of men? It for a people particularly who have been blatantly unaware of these men because we weren't taught about them intentionally by design. And if we were taught about them, we were taught that they were racist bigots.
Right.
So what does it look for us to honor honorable men worthy of our honor, but who we've either been lied to about or not told of their existence in the first place? What does it look like to try to embody that ethos, that spirit of Christian courageous, masculine virtue? What does it look like for a generation, particularly of Westerners today, who have never exercised those muscles before in our life? Neither did our parents or even our grandparents. For 3 generations, these muscles have never been used. It's going to look like LARPing. Get over it. Better to LARP in virtue than to lie in vice, in effeminacy, in faggotry. You're the problem. How dare you insult people who are attempting to be men and women who honor and esteem our fathers and mothers before us and uphold true biblical virtue and values? How dare you? A woman's wearing sundresses instead of yoga pants and trying to bake bread for her children and teach her daughters to be feminine and not boss babes wearing suits? And you're going to mock her as a LARPer? Yeah, that's what if conservatives are going to create culture again, if we're going to embrace virtue again, it has been so long that we have been asleep that it's going to look like a 5-year-old child. That's how bad we are currently. That's how long we've been off the bike. It's going to look like a 5-year-old child trying to ride a bicycle without training wheels for the first time. But you got to learn. You got to LARP before you can fly. That's okay.
The way God's made the world, everything gets better with age. A marriage matures and that there's more warmth and familiarity. Trees, so both in their stature, their size, their robustness, and also for wood. Trees that are green, they take wood and it bows when you try to use it to build a house. Everything from wine to wood to marriage to a home, all of these things, they mature, they decant, they become more robust with time. Why couldn't we, from Joe Biden's inauguration, 2021 through 2024, why couldn't we make culture in that 3-year period? We didn't have time. It takes time to do that. So we got 4 years. It's not enough. But if you're going to plant a tree or you're going to, start a journey of 1,000 miles, the best time to start was 10 years ago. The second best time is right now.
Michael, any thoughts? No? Good. We got someone in the comments. His name is Templar Lux. And he says, he's basically saying, speak for yourself. I am literally a Templar. My PFP is literally me. There is no sarcasm in this.
That's pretty funny.
I appreciate that.
Christendom has fallen, billions must LARP.
Billions must LARP. Well said. Yeah, yep. Christendom has fallen. Billions must LARP. Got to LARP before you can fly. You got to start somewhere. And we are exercising muscles, embracing old virtues that are completely foreign to us. I don't know anybody who doesn't admit that. I admit that. Like I admit that this is it's all new. It's all new. But it's true, right? It's true. And when you find something, the reality is in the technical sense, it's all old, but it's new. It's new to us, to our generation. We have been unfamiliar with these things. They have been foreign to us. And so when you find something that's new, it's novel to you, but you realize that it's old, it's tried, it's true, and it's precious, then you do everything you can to be like that, right? When you discover a true person of virtue, you attempt, right? That's right. It's imitation is the highest form of flattery, right? That's what you do. It's like, these men were virtuous. I see it now. I was never taught about these men, or I was taught lies about these men. But now that I see these men for who they are, they're virtuous. Yeah, I want to be like them. I know I'm not. But I'm going to try, because if I try, and by God's grace I grow, and my son tries, and by God's grace he grows, then I'm trying. But my grandson, he'll be flying. So, and it rhymes, therefore it must be true. All right, thanks for tuning in. God bless you guys. Stay tuned for this evening at 8 p.m. Central Time. The Friday special continues with myself and Pastor Andrew Isker on the topic of Israel.